Punchy hair and gun. Them a the first man out on the dam. Basket punchy head, bucket in his hand, bowl and punchy frock. I wanna she grandson to the market. Them a go. What them a them the day started. In the village as a walking. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. Animal them learn as them join in the waking. Cock a crow, dog a bark, donkey bray as a neighbor duck a quack. Cock a crow, dog a bark, donkey bray as a neighbor duck a quack.
Good evening. I'm here in Atlanta in the dwelling place of our esteemed brother Eusi Kwayana, and I'll be discussing with him on village life, village issues. Now, Brother Kwayana grew up in a village, so what it was like to grow up in a village in the first instance, and how did himself as a villager feel when talking of his village back in time?
Well, thank you, Brother McCrae. Welcome to our place here. You're giving me a rather wide mandate.
But the thing is, I don't want to confine you. So
I may find myself talking about things that people are not interested in, but I'm trying my best to find some point of interest. Growing up in a village, in something I wrote with my wife and wrote in 1973, published in 1999, because there was no free publication in Guyana during that time. I talked about village civilization recently when I sent a message to the Victoria anniversary. I think it's the 172nd anniversary of Victoria. I again referred to village civilization. It's not a popular concept, and I don't know whether the scholars accept it or not, but I know it is a reality. And growing up in a village, I think, is, for me, one of the best things that could happen to me. In fact, when I was about 13, I was born in Lusignan near to Buxton, and at the age of 7, when I was 7, the family moved to Buxton. I didn't know why, but they moved to Buxton because my father, who was an immigrant worker in Africa in the sugar industry, from the sugar industry in Guyana, was coming home on leave and could not be accommodated where we lived in the estate in a sort of extended family with my grandmother and uncles and everybody. We moved to Buxton, and it was the best thing that could happen to me in my life. I mean, in Lusignan and the family and the neighborhood and so on, we were quite happy. It was a plantation dictatorship, but that didn't bother us as children running around much. There was a school, there was a hospital, and there was work, and people were getting regular pay and coming home and so on, because the emancipation had long taken place. So we went to live in the village, which was another kind of society. You didn't have this sector of Europeans only, with people in charge of the village living there as you had on the estates. In fact, I began writing something about the spaces on a sugar plantation. I won't go into that now. But in the village, we had to rent a house because my father was coming to live with us. And so that is a village. We found that in the village there were households living in separate houses. This was a contrast to the major experience on a sugar estate in which the majority of people lived in ranges at that time. A range is hard to describe to one who does not know it. It's a long, low building, usually with a mud floor, although some people could put in wooden floors if they liked. And it was one roof stretching for maybe, perhaps 100 yards or so. One roof cut up into compartments. You can hardly see apartments. The floor was often wooden, a mud floor, and the kitchens would be at the back. There might be one big kitchen for some of these compartments, or a coal pot in the yard or something like that, but they had firesides. The firesides were made, homemade firesides, daubed with cow dung and mud and so on, and made up. But that was the estate. In the village, almost every household lived in a separate cottage. The little houses were called cottages. And a cottage would have a front step, a back step, a front door, a back door, and cut up into drawing room and bedrooms. Toilet, pantry, kitchen, and so on. Now, the kitchen sometimes was not there at the beginning of the building of the house. The house might be built without a kitchen. So when the household had enough money, they would add to the building. And very often,
Can I stop you, Brother Eusi? You said cent. 1 cent is 100th part of a dollar.
That's right. 20 mangoes.
20 mangoes for 100th part of a dollar. So
One
a
cent.
dollar mangoes would have been 20 times 100, 2,000 mangoes.
Correct.
For $1. And today in Guyana, you cannot buy one mango for less than probably
It just
$50.
It just shows how extraordinary the inflation is, and how the cost of living has mounted, because of all these various changes. And I guess will mount more because of the oil economy that is coming in. So that was one of the first things that impressed me. She asked me where you're going to put it. She left me a little bag to take home these 20 mangoes for a cent. We had mangoes in the estate, and people would bring them from the back, and sometimes you had your little mango tree, but no such thing as 20 mangoes for a cent. Now, school, I said early morning. Early morning in the village was a stir. One of the notable things in the village was it had its own post office. Each of these schools was managed by a church, which is often standing near to the school. There were shops. There were various races of people in the village. Each of them had shops. In the research I did, I knew the date when the first Portuguese family came into Buxton and owned property, 1925. The same year I was born, the Veras. They put up a cloth store. So you had cloth stores, you had groceries, abundant, plentiful cake shops, dispensaries, rum shops, and little sheds of things selling drinks. And in addition to that, you had a lot of trays. On important days there was a cinema in Buxton, yes, the Olympic Cinema. And when there was a cinema night, it was a good market time for people selling black pudding and sauce, selling parched nuts, selling chana, selling, in many cases, Indian sweetmeats, especially at weekend, and sometimes even pepper pot or something, things like that. In front of the cinema for the hours from about 4:30 p.m. until about 8:30 p.m. when the cinemas were nearly, when nobody else was entering the cinema, when the crowd was thinning out. So that was, then there was a market, the village market. I think the village market in Buxton was built about 1935 and became a center of activity on market days. I better say something about this before I go to the meat of it. But I'm putting the cart before the horse. I better go back now and talk about how the villagers lived. How villagers lived. Almost every plot of land, what we call a house lot, and I won't go into the history of the house lots, because they changed in size, they changed the way they were laid out over time. But almost every house lot would have coconut trees, some would have breadfruit, some would have dunce tree, some would have other fruit trees, many would have gardens, they would have pig pens, fowl pen, many would have spaces where they kept goats and sheep, livestock. That was village life. You woke up with the economy. It had an economy. Many young children, because each house lot had its backlands, many young children, before they go to school, had to go in the back to fetch wood to come home to cook with. So at 5:30, you are on your way with your cutlass, that is a little cutlass, and perhaps a bag or something, going into the nearer part of the backlands, not to your own farm, but just to pick wood, pick up wood to bring home to cook. If you don't do that, you buy the wood. And it was, of course, it had a cost. So a lot of children had to go to the back, do some work, pick up wood, come back home, bathe and dress, and get to school. The majority of children were going to school barefoot. Very often the teachers used to advise us to wear CO stockings, that's coconut oil stockings. So you rub your foot up with coconut oil and you get going. Each village had a railway station, and the railway station off the railway line on the east coast of Demerara, where you and I come from. The railway line more or less cut the village in half, north and south. The railway line ran from Georgetown and ended up at Rossignol and Berbice. And there were railway stations at Kitty, Plaisance, Bellevue Acting, Buxton, the railway platforms at Sugar Estates. After Buxton, I think it was Golden Grove, Belfield, Mahaika, Mycone, Fort Wellington, Litchfield, Mahaika, Mycone, yes, Litchfield, and finally Rossignol. The railway was established in the 1840s. At first, for a few miles, and then it was extended and extended until it reached Rossignol. I mentioned the railway at this point in a very disorderly fashion because I really didn't know what we were going to talk about.
Yes.
I mentioned it at this point because before we could say we're going to school, there is activity going. People working in Georgetown or along the route somewhere were hustling out to catch first train. The first train at Buxton was 6 o'clock in the morning. But the peculiar thing about it is that during the mango season, the last train from Georgetown, which would get to Buxton about 7 p.m., and Buxton had 2 rails. It had the main rail that ran from Georgetown to Rossignol, and it had a sideline or siding in which carriages or trucks could be left overnight or for any convenient time to be hooked up later to some train that was taking them somewhere. The fascinating thing for us was that every night during the mango season, the last train would leave, if I say 5 trucks, that would not be an exaggeration, would reverse, come back, take these trucks into this sideline, cut them off, and then take the train on to Belfield where it stopped. During the night, by the time the 6 o'clock train came in the opposite direction going from Belfield to Georgetown, people would bring their baskets of mangoes and pack in those trucks to be taken to Georgetown for sale next morning. So you had about 5 truckloads, and please take 5 as a nominal, because I can't swear it was 5, 6, 10 or what. I'm drawing on my childhood recollection. They were hooked up. A truck was a kind of open carrier, not like a carriage with seats for people to sit in, but open for load, for bags and baskets and anything else that people wanted to transport commercially. The 6 o'clock train would come in reverse, and every one of those trucks would be full of mango baskets, and the people would travel along with them in the train, and probably in 3rd class. We had 1st class, 2nd class and 3rd class. So the railway stations and the whole railway line at that time was a hive of activity, you know, people on the hustle. People, some going to work, some going on the farm, some, you know, seeing about their mangoes and all that kind of thing. Now let us go to Let us talk of agriculture. From about 5:30 a.m. and especially at about 6 o'clock, there was a certain type of activity, very encouraging and very uplifting activity. What was happening? The village, what we call the village really, is the residential part leading from about a depth of 1 mile from the seawall or sea defense or whatever kind of sea defense was there to what we call the gate or the wire. The gate or the wire was where the back dam began. The gate or the wire was where the back dam began. So between the seawall and the gate, residences could be found. Now, how did people get into the back dam? We had the village was divided into Buxton East, Buxton West, Friendship East, Friendship West. If we begin from Georgetown and start from Annandale, which is just before Buxton when you're coming from Georgetown, Annandale is part of plantation Lusitnan, as they see it in the documents, common access, with attachments. Annandale was a thing added to Lusitnan. Belonged to Bookers, occupied by Bookers and so on. Nobody owned it, no individual owned it. So if you're coming from Annandale, you leave Annandale, we have Buxton West sideline trench, and next to that trench we have Buxton, we have a sideline dam which is between Buxton and Annandale. It probably belongs to both. Then the Buxton West, and remember West is towards Georgetown, the Buxton West sideline dam, trench. And the thing about these sideline trenches is that they are the drainage trenches. It's a sideline trench that hauls the water down to the sea defense Skoka to be let out into the Atlantic Ocean and drain the land so that agriculture can take place. We leave the Buxton West sideline trench, we come to Buxton West land space, and then the Buxton Little Walk Road, and then Buxton East land space, and in Buxton East land space is where some very innovative young generation people have built a museum which is now very active, has been there for 3 years, and it stands between the public road and the railway line on a big block there, built on the basis of a private property handed over for the purpose. Now when we leave Buxton East, we come to the sideline trench, which is again draining water from the back dam into the ocean. And then Buxton East sideline dam, and then Company Trench or Company Canal. And when we get over Company Canal going towards Berbice, we have Friendship beginning, Friendship West sideline trench, doing the same drainage for Friendship that the Buxton sidelines do for Buxton. Then when we cross that Buxton or Friendship West sideline, we come into Friendship West. And continuing towards Berbice, we come to Friendship Middle Walk, and then Friendship Middle Walk Trench, and then Friendship East, and then Friendship East sideline. I think I left out something, but the point I want to make really and moving towards to is what the village looks like at 6:30 in the morning, beginning from 5:30 for some people. The company canal is like a highway of water traffic. Boats and canoes. The boats are bateaus. They're square-ended. The canoes are usually oval-shaped, pointed at each end. And what makes a difference is the canoes is really an East Indian tradition. And you will find that 99% of the canoes, in fact probably 100, were owned by Indian farmers. From Buxton Front, or Friendship Front, or from Allendale, or any other part of Buxton where they happen to live, or from Vigilance, which is a little fringe of a village to the east of Buxton. And that's where the police station really is. But to come back to the company canal, between 5:30 and 6:30, that thing is alive with boats, people getting into their boats with their paddles, their cutlasses, their tools, their fork, going into the background to spend the day. Some of them don't come back until after sunset, evening. The sun is gone. They have been working in their fields all day. They may take a break at midday, lie down under a tree and get some shade, because they have to expose themselves to the sun all day, and that is the life of villagers. Almost every other lot had a farmer, and I'm not exaggerating. In fact, many teachers and other people proudly call themselves, if they're signing up, say to get registered for an election or anything, they like to put farmer. They were proud to be farmers. That's where the mangoes came from, the plantain, the this, the that, everything. The yellow, and the bulk of coconuts and plantain, banana, sweet potato, all of these things. Many greens as well were growing in the back there. There were people who were growing in that back dam things like, I have it in the book on Friendship and Memory, things like onions and carrots and so on, They were so advanced, so they were growing special crops in those backlands. Not everybody, but a number of farmers. I have to mention here, because we're talking about, you notice I'm talking about Buxton because I know that by heart.
I have no problem with that, because what happened in Buxton probably was replicated in most other villages. So you're talking village life.
It's typical. But I want to tell people that I'm talking of what I know about.
Yeah.
And I have seen similar patterns in all the villages, but I didn't live there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to give some validity and authenticity to what I'm describing. And this is why I choose this place. Now, though that traffic would be traveling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 miles into the background. Each boat would have Sometimes it's a man and his wife. Sometimes it's a man and a wife and somebody else. Sometimes it's a friend. Sometimes the man alone, or the wife alone, or the widow alone. And they're going and plow those fields to get crops, to be able to sell at some point, and to be able to eat. And that was a tremendous part of village activity. I went back to insert that because when you talk about the market, that is where the crops, when they were reaped, would end up. Now, part of the farming in Buxton was cane farming. So you had two different things. You had food farming, and of course among the food we have to count coconuts, mangoes, and other fruit. And you had cane farming, the farming of a cash crop to be sold to the sugar estates nearby twice a year. In the first part of the year, called the spring crop, and November, December part called the autumn crop. And punts would come into the village. The villagers who plant cane would become cane cutters. Some of them did both work. They were cutting cane on their estate and planting their own cane. But what I want to give you is a picture of the economic activity. Part of the economic activity, the agricultural part of the economic activity. So that was the kind of agricultural activity, apart from gardens, of course. Many people had gardens growing greens, and women in particular growing plants in pots. Plenty plants growing in pots.
Flower pots.
Plenty plants growing in pots. They had one they called fern, maidenhair fern, and all kinds of plants, aloes, all sorts of things growing in pots. A sort of minor industry in itself. Mm-hmm. Peter Ruby Weatherspoon, for example, she had a flower garden and she used to sell flowers to flower shops in Georgetown. She would get people to bring them down daily, a little thing, but it was part of her economy.
Yeah. Brother Eusi, at the beginning of our conversation you mentioned village civilization, and you said the concept is not too widely known.
Mention what?
Village civilization.
Yes.
Can you expand a bit on that, seeing it's a new concept?
Well, I'm describing village civilization as it exists.
All right.
All of that is part of
also,
what I mean. But it
mentioned...
has a special meaning in my use. But all of that is the practical
the manifestation of village civilization.
The practical expression of the village civilization.
Right. You mentioned also something which is new to me, that your father was contracted to work in Africa on the sugar plantation. I never knew that we had people going to Africa to work in sugar.
Oh my goodness, yes. He's not the only one.
I know, I believe you. I know we had people going to the Caribbean working as palm boilers and so on.
Later days.
Going to Africa, the only thing I knew of Africa is that they had recruited some of our people to go into the militia.
Into where?
Into the militia, the army or police. They had some of our people working there.
War. Yes, they sent Ashanti to the Ashanti War.
Yeah. We had people,
sent the West India Regiment.
We had people in that category, but I'm not aware of us going also as sugar workers, plantation workers.
Mm-hmm. My father and a number of others. I know the name Gaskin, I know the name Daniels.
What skills did they go there to practice?
They went to Angola and Mozambique. My father died in Mozambique.
Okay. Those were Portuguese colonies.
Hmm?
Those were Portuguese colonies.
Portuguese colonies.
I thought the British and the Portuguese were not mixing. How did they?
Well, they had business relations.
Business relations. Okay, I see.
They knew where to recruit labor.
Also,
technical labor.
you said something that not the Veras, these Portuguese, the first Portuguese shop went into Buxton in the 20s, 1920. You said the first Portuguese shop was established in Buxton in the 20s. I can't remember what date you said.
I said 1925.
1925.
No, I don't know when the shop was established, but the family came there in 1925 and bought a building.
Okay.
And that is why I know 1925. I saw that in the deeds registry. And their name was Vera.
Vera. No, but what
Mrs. Vera had a shop in Buxton, a store shop.
What I have read about this year, not specific to Buxton, is that immediately after emancipation, in the early days of indentureship, our farmers could not have sold produce directly to the plantation owners or to the plantations where they had the indentured laborers. We had to sell through the Portuguese middlemen. So quite a few Portuguese came and established businesses into our villages. I remember the village of Nabaclis objecting to the presence of a Portuguese in the village. So is it so that in Buxton had no Portuguese until the Veras?
Yes.
Okay.
There were more Portuguese. You see, in the 1850s, 1856 and later, there were 2 Portuguese riots in Georgetown.
In Georgetown, yeah.
And some of them spread along the East Coast.
Yeah.
So the objection to Portuguese arose out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was mixed. It was not a single story.
I know.
For example, I have in my book, The Legend, Mr. Sanko of Golden Grove. He made it his business to go about and see that no one interfered with the Portuguese, to see that they were not attacked. In other places, that was not the case. And I don't have any record of what happened in Buxton. There's no tradition of a riot in Buxton.
Not necessarily riots, I'm talking about the presence of the Portuguese operating business. I thought it was all the villages they operated, where they were the middlemen between the African farmers and the European plantation.
I don't get that.
No, what I learned is that our ancestors could not have sold their produce directly to the plantations. They had to sell through the Portuguese middlemen, who were given the trade license.
I see. Oh, I see.
And they established themselves in our villages to trade.
I see. That may be so. I never knew that.
Okay.
I never knew that. That is probably how it happened.
Yeah.
How they came.
Because they came indentured, but then there was this agreement where they would be facilitated into business.
They came in a different kind of indenture. They came with some backing.
Yes, by the Portuguese government.
They came in a sort of, they came from Madeira.
Yeah.
They had a very powerful diplomatic representative in Georgetown named Togard. He was a kind of ambassador for the Portuguese. And the Portuguese came in Portuguese ships and they were able to bring merchandise. So they landed as traders, you know.
Okay.
They were indentured laborers.
But traders.
And yet they were traders. In fact, they were so strange in the laboring field that the Africans called them white niggers. That is how they were called. They couldn't understand white people working in the field.
Well,
so they said these are white niggers.
One school of thought is that they deliberately went to get the Portuguese so as to demonstrate to the Africans that, look, these people are willing to work, do plantation work, and they are white, and you guys are saying it's not fitting work. It was just to show the contrast. They could have gone on this way to get indentured laborers, but eventually the Portuguese came out of it, and they stayed into the business trading class.
That is interesting. That is interesting. And that may have been part of it, but I know they had special
They came with a special dispensation.
special arrangements in many cases. What they were allowed to do and how they came was different from how the Indian immigrants and the later African immigrants came.
Okay.
That is true.
I see.
You see, I'm putting this against the background of the myth that these village people were lazy and did nothing. Perhaps they lived by some miracle. I don't know if that is why there were so many churches, but it's not. I have at the back of my mind that kind of myth all the time as I speak.
Yeah.
And the farmers going into the back of the village where I grew up, which is the one I can talk about, and which was typical of village life. They were of all races, including Portuguese. There were one or two Portuguese that were farmers, not many. If we leave the agriculture as such, the tilling of the soil and the getting of fruits of the soil from it, we go next to two things: coconut oil making and pig rearing. Coconut oil making is a kind of domestic industry because these coconut mills are little factories in people's yards. And they brought their coconuts. Some of them had extensive coconut cultivation in the back down. You would bring them down. They had engines in these oil mills, and they had a process of making coconut oil, which was much purer than the commercialized coconut oil that is now sold. Until recently, Wheating and Richter brought in a kind of friol, they called it, which did a lot of damage to people's health because of the way it was processed. And that kind of activity from Wheating and Richter and Risol Mirage closed down a lot of the cottage mills, the domestic coconut oil mills that existed in every village. Now, part of that waste from the coconut oil went to feed pigs, and part of the waste from rice industry, from rice factories nearby, something called rice dust. If you remember, rice dust was one of the ingredients of pig feed. So pig feed was swill from the homes, plantain skins and vegetable skins and waste, and rice dust.
Goosey.
And people fed their pigs and they matured them for market. And that was a part of the meat industry in Guyana. I've said nothing about chickens because that is so well known, even up to now. The other part of domestic industry I'd like to touch on, there were numerous bakeries. So the bakery is a little factory in itself. like the coconut oil mill. And seamstresses. Seamstresses making clothing in their houses, mainly for women and children. And then we had the tailors, mainly making men's clothing. We had the tailors, the cabinet makers, the carpenters who had built all those houses, and tinsmiths making, and this was typical of villages generally, you know. All these little sub-trades I'm talking about, these cottage industries were not Buxtonian things, but village things. But I had to distinguish some specifics, you know, and I don't want to generalize too much.
Yeah.
So we had the seamstresses, we had of course people teaching, we had seamstresses, we had hairdressers, pig rearers, poultry rearers, tinsmiths, guttersmith, blacksmith. All the villages, I think, had their own blacksmith because they had to put shoes on the donkeys or horses or whatever were pulling the carts, you know, and taking jobs of various kinds. At one time, the village I lived in had 3 blacksmiths that I knew about. And blacksmith work was semi-industrialization, hard work, changing the nature of metals, getting them to apply to various uses. Now, school life, very interesting. I enjoyed every bit of it in Buxton. I went to school in Buxton, I went to school in Bedford acting at different ages. The schools to me were, I never went to school in Georgetown. I never went to high school. The schools were a joy. A joy, they had pain as well because you got licks. But they were a joy. You had singing, you had all sorts of things. The females in sewing, and later on domestic science. And the population of the schools, the same population in the village went to the schools. I went to Roman Catholic school in Buxton. Majority African children, a strong Indian minority from various parts of the village, sometimes from nearby villages, depending on where the school was. Many of them from Buxton Front, where the Indians were majority, they went to the Congregational school. Some went to the Methodist school. Some came from Lusignan and entered there. I'm saying this because I'm bringing this up because of the mythology that is being promoted now by certain newspapers in Ghana, especially Ghana Times, as if people did not know one another at all. Guinea was another big crop in the villages. The guinea tree and the guinea season, very prominent. The schools, majority of people went to school barefoot. some wore shoes and socks and so on. Or some wear shoes and socks, some wore shoes alone. Many wore yachtings. The teachers were very industrious. They would work during the normal 5 hours, 3 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon, I think, and then have lessons. And in many cases, these lessons were free. I never paid for lessons in primary school. Well, I never went to any other school. But I did not, none of my teachers in primary school took fees. If they did, I would not have been able to pay them, perhaps, after my father died. So all of that was part of the village spirit. Some teachers would have students coming home to them after work for tutoring, if they were keen. So that they tried to get the best out of the children, once the children were willing to make the effort. I can think of teachers who did that, including some headmasters. This fees paying had been a requirement in the schools up to, I think, the time of compulsory primary education. Our poor parents had to pay to go to primary school. They had to pay fees. It was not free. The churches had the schools, but we had to pay every cent of the expenses. And that cut down the number of people who could benefit. That's why compulsory primary education was so beneficial. And Africans took great advantage of it. They struggled to pay the fees so the children could learn to read and write. And in some villages there was a thing called African Night School, where they would teach whoever would come. They played games, competitive cricket, inter-school cricket, village against village, school against school, school from one village against school from another village. And so there was life. All that can be seen as village civilization. Various aspects of life were practiced and enjoyed.
Yeah, man, that's a true story. I tell the people about life in the country, life in the country.